Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and to our Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class. Om Sarva Jiva Papanasha Karanam Bhaveshwaram Swikritam Cha Garbhavasa Deha Pashamidrisham Yapitam Swalilaya Cha Yena Divya Jivanam Yapitam Swalilaya Cha Yena Divya Jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha. Om Tava Katamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhidiritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Jana. So this morning we are beginning Sunday, April 8th, 1883. And in this book, it's on the bottom of page 200. In the chapter, in the English version, again, the chapters' names are different from the Bengali, but the English version, the chapter is Advice to the Brahmos. Sunday, April 8th, 1883. It was Sunday morning. The master, looking like a boy, was seated in his room, and near him was another boy, his beloved disciple Rakal. Him entered and saluted the master. Ramlal also was in the room, and Kishori, Manilal Malik, and several other devotees gathered by and by. So here it's interesting that he says the master, looking like a boy, was seated in his room, and near him was another boy. So he didn't say with him was a real boy, an actual boy, but he said another boy. And that, I feel sure, was intentional because with Sri Ramakrishna, he was not trying to pretend to be like a boy. Wasn't trying to act like a kid or as many adults do, either just because they want to be younger or because they're just trying to make connection with young people. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We all do that, trying to adapt to the other person so that we can relate to them. But Sri Ramakrishna wasn't like that. He had the ability to identify with whatever mood, state, type of being he wanted or that he was focused on, to identify with it completely. So that, as we know, when he was in the state of the Sakhi Bhava, when he was a lady friend, woman friend of the Divine Mother, as for part of his sadhana, that he actually looked like a woman. People, when he dressed as a woman, even close friends and devotees like Mathur Babu couldn't tell who he was, because he could take on the appearance of that which he identified with. And again, that is not something magical, or not that the bone structure of his face was changing so that he was unrecognizable in that sense. But no, he was so absorbed in a mood that it was reflected in his whole body. His facial expression and his bodily posture, his gestures, everything changed. And so when he was in a boy-like mood, which he often was because he thought of himself as a child of the Divine Mother, then he would really become like a little boy. And many times you see it in here, and you see it in the Leela Prasanga, the great master, also how often Sri Ramakrishna was in a boy-like state. And so here says that he was looking like a boy, and then his disciple Rakal, another boy, was there with him. He continues, Manilal Malik, a businessman, had recently been to Benares, where he owned a bungalow. Master, so you have been to Benares. Did you see any holy men there? Manilal, yes, sir. I paid my respects to Trilanga Swami, Bhaskarananda, and others. Master, tell us something about them. Manilal, Trilanga Swami is living in the same temple where he lived before, on the Manikarnika Ghat, near the Beni Madhav minaret. People say he was formerly in a more exalted spiritual state. He could perform many miracles. Now he has lost much of that power. Master, that is the criticism of worldly people. So here, hearing that Mani Malik had been to Benares, Sri Ramakrishna immediately asks about, did you see any holy men? Because Benares was famous as a place of pilgrimage and also a place where holy men went to live. And it still is. It's still a place where holy men, holy women go to live. And there's a deep and long spiritual tradition there, and there's a tangible spiritual atmosphere in Benares, which is very powerful for those who are sensitive to it. It's not that everybody in Benares, living in Benares is sensitive to it. Many just lead their ordinary worldly lives. But those who are sensitive to it, there is a tremendous atmosphere. And nowadays, if you go to Benares, at first it looks like just an extremely crowded, extremely busy, extremely overpopulated city with incredible traffic that is just some of the worst I've seen in India. But when you go to the inner city, the old part of the city where Vishwanath and Kedarnath, Kedarghat and Annapurna and the old temples are, there you feel like you're in old India. And so around that is the modern city of Benares, which is extremely busy and very dirty and dusty and everything too. The air is very polluted and everything. There's nothing very attractive about the outer part of the city at all. But inside is where the spiritual life of Benares is still tangibly felt. And so there's still people who go there. It's a center of music culture, a center of Sanskrit learning, punditry, and a center of spirituality, and a wonderful city. I've often told people from India, but living in the West, that Benares is my favorite city in India, and people ask, oh, but why? It's so dirty and so crowded and everything. Yes, that's true, and that's unfortunate, but the atmosphere is still there. And when you go again to the inner part of the old city, there you don't feel those influences. You're in a different world, and along the Ghat, along the Ganges as well. So, yes. We have two ashramas in Benares. One is the Home of Service, which was founded by some of Swamiji's disciples under his instruction during Swamiji's lifetime. So it was one of the oldest centers in the order after Belur Mutt. And then not even, it's in the same compound, same larger compound, but across the lane is the Advaita Ashrama. And that's in Lakshman, I forget the name of the neighborhood, Lakshman something. But it's within the holy part of Benares. That is, it's not in the old part of Benares where the main temples are, but it's in the part of Benares where it's said that if you die within these limits, then you are liberated. And so Advaita Ashrama now is a place where it is used, I should say, the Advaitashrama in Benares, not the Advaitashrama of Mayavati. That's completely different. Advaitashrama in Benares, which was founded by Swami Shivananda, the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, that is used as a retirement home for old Swamis, as it has been for many, many decades. So, and then again, Manilal tells about going to see Trailanga Swami and Bhaskarananda. Now, I know Trailanga Swami, Sri Ramakrishna had seen him and was deeply impressed with him and saw that he was a real Paramahamsa. I can't remember if Sri Ramakrishna met Bhaskarananda, but Swami Vivekananda and Holy Mother both met Bhaskarananda. So Trailanga Swami was widely recognized and is still recognized as a Paramahamsa, as a realized soul. An amazing life that he lived in Benares, and he's one of those who is said to have lived for, I forget whether it was over 200 years or over 300 years, one or the other, but something much longer than is considered the possible for a human life. But then there were people who knew him, whose grandfathers had known him, and their fathers had known him, and so there were generations of people in Benares who had known him way back, so spanning at least 2 centuries, maybe more, I forget now. So, but he always lived in a very high state. So that he was unaffected by heat or by cold. He would lie naked on the sands of the Ganges, the banks of the Ganges, in the intense heat of the summer there, and he would do the same in the winter when it gets quite cold in Benares. So then Manilal says that people now say that he has lost much of his power because formerly he used to perform many miracles. So Sri Ramakrishna rightly says that that's the talk of worldly people. Worldly people are looking for some external display. To understand spirituality, that's very, very few people can understand spirituality. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, and Holy Mother used to say often, what happens to a person when they become spiritually illumined? Do they grow a pair of horns? No, there's nothing external that you can see them by. Another realized soul, seeing a realized soul, can recognize them, but only one realized soul can recognize another. If we've been around a lot of holy people, then we begin to get a sense of what it means, even though we are not there yet. We begin to get a sense. And if we meet somebody, we have a sense of whether this person also is spiritually elevated or not. We may not be able to tell, or we can't tell if they are fully illumined or not, but we can tell if the person is deeply spiritual or just an ordinary aspirant or just a hypocrite. But until we have become very sensitive, either by our own high elevation or by having lived among spiritual people for a long time, we can't tell. And so that's why ordinary people look so much to miracles and things like that, because, oh, I can see it. Nobody can pull flowers out of the air, and yet this Babaji, he can just manifest flowers out of the air. Nobody can manifest Shiva lingams, but this can manifest a Shiva lingam and give it to people. And nobody can read other people's thoughts, but this Babaji can read other people's thoughts, and so or cure illnesses or whatever it is. The more it appeals to the ordinary sensitivities of people, like manifesting something that's valuable or something that you want, or curing an illness which you also want, that is, the more it appeals to our desires, the more holy we think they are. And so it's good to be able to read thoughts, but we don't want to go around such people because they might read our thoughts. But if they can cure our illness, then they must be really holy. And if they can give us something that we can take home as a souvenir, that they manifested out of the air, then they must really be holy also. So Sri Ramakrishna rightly says that, no, that's the talk of worldly people. That a person like Trailanga Swami, when he did manifest miraculous things, and there were various things that happened around him. With him, because he was in the state of a Paramahamsa, he never did anything for show. It wasn't showing off. It wasn't trying to attract followers. He had taken a vow of silence for many, many years, and so he didn't talk to people, and he wasn't interested in gathering followers. He didn't have a band of followers. So his was just in the state of enlightenment, spontaneously things happened. As there was a woman in Kanyakumari who passed away some, 15, 20 years ago. She was a Brahmavadini, but she lived like a mad woman, wandering in the streets of Kanyakumari. But around her, all sorts of incredible things would happen, miracles would happen. And I've known people, in fact, our Ramakrishna Mataji in Dallas, she saw her just by accident. She was walking to the Kanyakumari temple, the Devi temple, and suddenly she felt a tremendous spiritual atmosphere, a wave of like electricity in the air coming over her. And then after that, suddenly appeared this woman walking like a mad person down the street, on across the street. And she asked the person who was taking her to the temple, "Who is that?" And they explained that this was that Brahmavadini Mataji. I forget her name. But around her also sometimes miracles would happen. But these people are not trying to gather a following. They're not doing it to show off. It's because in that state, just things happen. And so Sri Ramakrishna, he always advised against the exercise of siddhis, psychic powers. He himself had them, and sometimes they would happen around him, as we know, but never with the idea of showing off. You see in the life of Jesus, where in Christianity for 2,000 years, they've made much of the miracles of Jesus, that this is what proves Jesus was God, because he could walk on water and do things which other people can't do. No, that's not the proof that he was God at all. Anybody can learn to do those things if they put their mind on it and practice the requisite disciplines. They don't even have to be holy. They don't even have to be good people. They can gain those powers. Jesus was holy. Jesus was God because he was identified with God, and he lived the will of God. Spoke in every movement and every word of his. And it's interesting that to Jesus in the Bible, it said that when he would cure somebody or perform some miracle, he would say, "Don't tell anyone what has happened." But of course, the people would go and tell everybody, and then crowds would come to see him. But it wasn't that he was trying to prove that I am God, see what I can do. No, it was nothing like that. And so with people like this, Trilanga Swami, at this point in his life, such things were not happening. And so naturally people thought, oh, he's lost his power. No, it had nothing to do with his power whatsoever.
Swami, there are some requirements for sainthood to have people should do some miracles,
Yes, that's it. In the Surin is just saying that in the Catholic Church, to become a saint in the Catholic Church, sainthood in the Catholic Church doesn't mean what we mean by, oh, he's a real saint, meaning that such as a real holy man or woman who has attained to a high level of spiritual development. In the Catholic Church, to be a saint, there are particular requirements. So that there are many people in the history of Catholicism who were, by our definition, great saints, but were never recognized as such by the Church. Because to be a saint, you have to have performed some miracles. Either during your life or after you die, people praying to you have some miracle happen because of their prayer to you. It has to be something that could not be explained by some other means, but must have been because of prayer to this saint. And that shows the ability to work miracles, shows the closeness of that person to God. Because they're close to God, they can ask God, please intercede on this person's behalf, and then the miracle happens. So that has nothing to do with our idea of sainthood at all. Our idea of sainthood is only exclusively whether the person has come close to or become identified with God. Come close in experience or identified, but either way is completely transformed. The inner person is completely transformed. To use the language of St. Paul, the old man is dead and the new man has taken birth, or the new woman, the new person. So that is the criticism of worldly people. Manilal. Trilanga Swami keeps a strict vow of silence. Unlike him, Bhaskarananda is friendly with all. So that also is a little bit revealing of Manilal, that Trilanga Swami keeps a vow of silence, but Bhaskarananda, he's friendly with everybody, talks with everybody, so obviously Manilal liked that. And of course, part of that is natural. It means that you could go and approach Bhaskarananda, talk to him, ask questions, and get answers and things. So of course, anyone's going to like that. But that also has nothing to do with spirituality. That's just either a question of temperament, or in this case, more likely, a question of the state that they were in. Bhaskarananda was widely recognized as a saintly person, but he was not a Paramahamsa like Trilanga Swami. So he was not in the high state that Trilanga Swami was in. Master, did you have any conversation with Bhaskarananda? Manilal, yes, sir, we had a long talk. Among other things, we discussed the problem of good and evil. He said to me, don't follow the path of evil. Give up sinful thoughts. That is how God wants us to act. Perform only those duties that are virtuous. Master, yes, that is also a path meant for worldly-minded people. But those whose spiritual consciousness has been awakened, who have realized that God alone is real and all else illusory, cherish a different ideal. They are aware that God alone is the doer and others are his instruments. Now that's a wonderful paragraph, a very illuminating paragraph. Here, Manilal says that he and Bhaskarananda talked about the problem of good and evil. And so Bhaskarananda said that the path is to do only good actions, not to avoid evil actions. And God wants us to act in a proper way, so perform only those duties which are virtuous, etc. That's, as Sri Ramakrishna said, that's good for worldly-minded people. When we still have bad things that we want to do, and then the first thing to learn in the spiritual path is what is good to do and what is bad to do, and to avoid that and to do good things. But that's the very preliminary part of religion. Yes, even as we go forward, we find sometimes that we do something which is beneath our ideal, and then we correct ourselves. But the consciousness of this, the intense consciousness of what I should do and shouldn't do, that's only at the beginning of spiritual life. And that's a period which is very difficult for many people, because it sets up a lot of conflicts. They're trying to improve themselves, trying to choose the right thing and not the wrong thing. And so there's a lot of tension that's created. So it's a stressful time in spiritual life for everyone. Unavoidable, but stressful. But again, that's the beginning. We want to come to a place where, with rare exception, the mind naturally wants to do good things. And we don't have to think so much about, oh, I don't want to do that, or I've got to stay away from that, I have to avoid this. Those things, the less they come to the mind, the better we are. Once goodness has become spontaneous, doing the right thing has become spontaneous. And that happens to a full degree when we begin to develop love for God. When we begin to develop love for God, those questions disappear. The question of doing good and doing evil and those things, we don't even think about it. And we don't look out at the world and see evildoers everywhere. That intense awareness of good and evil, that's a relatively low state. That's a beginning state of spirituality. So whether it's religious preachers, teachers, leaders, or politicians, or whoever is always talking about good and evil and condemning the large part of humanity to evil, then they have barely started the spiritual path. That's a low level of consciousness. A much higher level of consciousness comes with love of God when we begin to feel, even long before we've realized it, long before it's a matter of deep experience. But when we begin to feel that now I'm beginning to understand, somehow I have a feeling that everything happens by God's will, then those questions don't come up. If everything happens by God's will, who am I to stand here and say, oh, this is a good person and that's a bad person, they should be punished, and I hope they get the full extent of the law thrown at them, and so forth. No, those are low states of mind. So talking of evildoers and all of that, Sri Ramakrishna never liked that, because it shows a low state of mind. So Sri Ramakrishna continues, those whose spiritual consciousness has been awakened never make a false step. They do not have to reason in order to shun evil. They are so full of love of God that whatever action they undertake is a good action. They are fully conscious that they are not the doers of their actions, but mere servants of God. They always feel, I am the machine and he is the operator. I do as he does through me. I speak as he speaks through me. I move as he moves me. So that, yes, as he often used to say, that the person with awakened spiritual consciousness is like the expert dancer who never takes a false step. That is, when we're learning to dance, out of our natural clumsiness, we're always putting our foot and our hands and body in the wrong place at the wrong time, out of tempo. And so we have to learn, okay, put this foot here like this, put this foot here like his, hold this hand like so, hold that hand like so. And you learn how to do step by step, each part of the body, what position it should be in. But once one has become a master dancer, you don't have to think, okay, now right foot this way, now left foot that way, now my right hand this way, or left hand that way, swing this way. No, you just do it. It becomes spontaneous. And so the person whose spiritual consciousness has been awakened, they don't have to think, is this a good action or is this a bad action? Should I do this or shouldn't I do that? They do the action which is appropriate to the situation. They can't do anything else. They don't think of doing anything else. And they have the idea that it's not I who act, but God who acts through me. And so their action becomes spontaneous. The ego is not standing in the way between the impulse to act and the action itself. The ego doesn't come in between and say, "Oh, I don't think so," or "I don't like this," or "I don't. I think this would be better," or "I want to do that. I don't want to do that." No, the action becomes spontaneous because you feel not coming from subconscious urges, not coming from the lower animal urges and so forth, but this the urge coming from a deep place within. You feel that it's coming of itself and expressing itself. And because through love of God you have become purified, you feel that that action itself is coming from a place of purity. So, but nowadays in the West, this is not a problem in India, maybe among some of the highly westernized parts, but I haven't seen it in India. In the West, the problem, especially in America, is people wanting to be spontaneous. That we just have to be spontaneous, get rid of all of this idea of control and trying to control everything. No, just let it all hang out, be yourself, just be spontaneous. No, that's just giving way to unconscious urges. That's becoming a slave to your own mind, your own lower mind, your own unconscious mind. There's no good that comes out of slavery to the unconscious mind. And that's another thing which has become widely prevalent in the West nowadays because of the influence of modern psychology. Modern psychology has done some wonderful things. Learned much about mental illness and ways to treat mental illness, to help people who are in having mental problems. And that's a wonderful thing. But it also has done a great deal of harm. Not just through Freud, but through Jung as well, through the behaviorists and others. Because these are all people that were good people, intelligent people, who were studying the human mind, trying to help people. But they had a very limited view of human nature. And so their limited view is projected all through their psychology. So yes, we can learn things from Freud. We can learn things from Jung. We can even learn things from B.F. Skinner, the founder of modern behaviorism, though that's more of a stretch, but yes, there are things we can learn from him also. But they're also saying that we have to do that by being aware of their limitations, that they were not realized souls, they were not illumined people, they didn't know human nature. They knew the surfaces and the slight undersurface of the mind. That's as far as they got. They didn't know the depths of the mind. They tried to look into the depths of the mind, but they didn't have the mental power or perceptivity to see into the depths of the mind. And so their view of humanity and of the mind and of the unconscious and subconscious mind is extremely truncated. So Swami Yatishwaranji, a great yogi of the order, he used to advise people to study modern psychology because we can learn. But with that proviso that we have to be careful, because coming back to the original point that I was making, is that the spread of the idea of the wisdom of the unconscious has spread in the Western civilization, that the unconscious mind is the seat of all of this unconscious wisdom, and so we just have to surrender to the unconscious. No, don't do that. The unconscious mind is the repository. Yes, there's wisdom in the unconscious mind, and all of your problems are in the unconscious mind too. All of the things that get you into trouble are surfacing from the unconscious mind as well. The unconscious mind is just like a container that contains everything, good, bad, indifferent. And so you can't just surrender to that. And so that idea has to be overcome. That and the idea of spontaneity. Being spontaneous doesn't mean giving in to the unconscious mind. Being spontaneous means that the mind has become so purified that those lower urges never come to the surface and direct your mind. Only higher urges come. And I believe there's a question now from the others.
Two comments.
Two comments, okay.
One is Raka and another is David Miller.
Okay, let me see.
Several numbers.
Okay. David Miller, among the senior Ramakrishna order monks, who are some of the great realized souls? Even outside the order, are there any you know of? A good question and a difficult question. There are some swamis in the order who are deeply spiritual. And Swami Vivekananda had said that Bellarmine will always have some realized souls. But as everybody says, and I'll say also, they don't go around wearing a sign. You know them just by the quality of their life. And so exactly where they are in the spiritual path as far as the elevation, that I'm not going to hazard a guess. And I'm not going to, unfortunately, name names because it would not be fair to them. To advertise their name, and then suddenly people are writing to them and calling them and going to see them when they don't want to be outed like that. So I can't give you, I'm sorry, I can't give you a list of names, but yes, there are some in India and outside of India who are deeply spiritual, who are very saintly. The rest of us are aspirants. We're trying. We're sadhakas. Some more advanced than others, but we're going along the path. So don't think that, as some people do, that every Swami is a realized soul. No, those are very few. But there are some who are highly spiritual. They're hard to find. And the rest of us are making our way there. Hoping to get there. And outside of the order, there are some great spiritual people also. But again, I don't, my life for the last 50 years has been inside of the order, so I don't have that. I go to a lot of conferences, but conferences are not places where you meet realized souls. Conferences are where you meet people like yourself who are moving forward. So let's see, another.
Age. That is
Okay, I don't even see that.
at the top.
At the top. Okay, no, I just see. Oh, Raka, 1607 to 1887. Okay, so that's 280 years. 280. Thank you, Raka. So Trailanga Swami, we have it on the authority of Raka that he lived for 280 years. So again, you can doubt that. You shouldn't believe anything just because somebody says it, and you heard in a class from the Greater Vedanta Society of Greater Houston that somebody lived 280 years. No, we shouldn't be fools. But this is not me saying it. There are many people and people who were contemporaneous with him, who again, their grandfathers had known him, and their grandfathers' grandfathers had known him, and so this was something which is hard to prove to the modern mind, but difficult to negate because of the contemporaneous witnesses to Trailanga Swami. So, Sri Ramakrishna continues, fully awakened souls are beyond virtue and vice. They realize that it is God who does everything. So beyond virtue and vice has to be understood properly, because there's the idea nowadays spread by some teachers, what some are calling crazy wisdom. That if the crazy wisdom is even higher than ordinary enlightenment, that those masters who are in crazy wisdom, they can do anything. There are no moral constraints on them. They can do all sorts of horrible things, and it doesn't matter because they've gone beyond virtue and vice. No, don't accept any such nonsense. That's foolishness, and anyone who teaches that is foolish as well, and should be called out for being foolish, because they're spreading ridiculous ideas which are contrary to all spiritual traditions, and contrary to spiritual experience. No, as one progresses in the spiritual life, as one comes closer to enlightenment. Let's drop the God word because for this statement, because not everyone follows a theocentric path, a God-centric path. As we approach enlightenment, then all of the kleshas, all of the bad tendencies within us are burnt out. And then you can't do evil. Then spontaneously you do the right thing. You have the sense, again, like the expert dancer, that every place you put your foot is a right place, the right place. You don't have to think about it. Everything just spontaneously flows in the right way. And any desire to do evil and to harm people, to take advantage of people, that disappears. It's true that Sri Ramakrishna said that a person who has had enlightenment, even if they kill somebody, there's no karma to it. But he didn't mean that they go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody just because they wanted to shoot somebody. What he meant was that if, in the course of things, say if a person were protecting others and in order to protect them had to fight off somebody else and ended up killing them because he was trying to protect innocent people from a harmful agent, then there would be no bad karma. Because even for an ordinary person, if we kill a person in self-defense, that's justified. But there's an effect. There's an effect. That's why police officers, after they've shot someone in the line of duty, even if it was a actually legitimate act, in order to save innocent people or to save himself or herself, they have to be given leave because it takes time to overcome the effects of that. And in the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, it may still be the practice, it probably is, because they're very conservative, that if someone in the armed forces decides to renounce the world and become a monk, they have to wait, I forget whether it's something like 2 years, and go through some purification before they're allowed to join, because in the line of duty they may have had to kill people or injure people. And so that also is considered legitimate. It's not adharmic, it's not unrighteous, but there is an effect. But Sri Ramakrishna said that an illumined soul is not touched by any action, but that doesn't mean they go around raping and pillaging and killing people. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that everything that they do is done with the love of God, for the love of God, in the consciousness of the divinity of everything, where every footstep is correctly placed without even thinking about it. He continues, there was a monastery in a certain place. The monks residing there went out daily to beg their food. One day a monk, while out for his alms, saw a landlord beating a man mercilessly. The monk stepped in and asked the landlord to stop. But the landlord was filled with anger and turned his wrath against the innocent monk. He beat the monk till he fell unconscious on the ground, the monk, that is. Someone reported the matter to the monastery. The monks ran to the spot and found their brother lying there. 4 or 5 of them carried him back and laid him on a bed. He was still unconscious. The other monks sat around him, sad at heart. Some were fanning him. Finally, someone suggested that he should be given a little milk to drink. When it was poured into his mouth, he regained consciousness. He opened his eyes and looked around. One of the monks said, "Let us see whether he is fully conscious and can recognize us." Shouting into his ear, he said, "Revered sir, who is giving you milk?" "Brother," replied the holy man in a low voice, "he who beat me is now giving me milk." But, Sri Ramakrishna continues, one does not attain such a state of mind without the realization of God. So here the idea is that for the monk, everything happened by the will of God, that God is the doer of everything. And so when he received a beating, that was at the will of God. And now when a monk is lovingly caring for him and giving him milk, that also is the same God who's serving his needs now. And so they don't make any distinction. And that state actually comes. That is a high state. But it is a state that actually comes, and we know from the historical record. There was, of course, Pauhari Baba, where things like this happened, when the thief came and tried to rob him and was running away with a bundle of his puja articles, and Pauhari Baba started chasing him. The thief dropped the puja articles and ran. So Pauhari Baba picked up the bundle and ran after him, caught him, and said, "Oh Lord, here you forgot your bundle," and gave it to him, because he had no idea of personal possession, and he had the idea that everything and everyone is God. When he was bitten by a snake, he said it was a messenger of the beloved. Nag Mahashaya, the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, was in the same state, and others also have been in that state. There was in the Sepoy Mutiny, there was the holy man who was killed by someone. And as he was being killed, he looked up at the man, the Muslim who was attacking him, and he said, "Thou also art that." That is, thou art that, Tatvamasi, but he said, "Thou also art that." You also are that divine reality. And Swami Abhedananda once saw in Rishikesh, in the old days in Rishikesh, when it was just a retreat for monks. It was not the district town, big town it's become now, big bustling city it's become now. But then it was just a retreat for sadhus. He saw a sadhu being dragged from the bank of the Ganges by a tiger. And as long as the sadhu had a voice, he was calling out, "Shivoham, Shivoham, Shivoham, I am Shiva, I am Shiva, I am Shiva," until the tiger had killed him. So such things happen. This story may be just a story, or it may be a tale of something that actually happened. But even if it's just a tale, it's a tale based on actual stories of the same intent. Manilal, sir, but what you have just said applies to a man of a very lofty spiritual state. I talked on such topics in a general way with Bhaskarananda. Master, does he live in a house? Manilal, yes, sir, he lives with a devotee. Master, how old is he now? Manilal, about 55. Master, did you talk about anything else? Manilal, I asked him how to cultivate bhakti. He said, chant the name of God, repeat the name of Rama. Master, that is very good. So yes, that of course is standard advice, but that is standard advice and good advice. So it continues with the narration. The worship was over in the temples, and the bells rang for the food offerings in the shrine. As it was summer noon, the sun was very hot. The flood tide began in the Ganges and a breeze came up from the south. Sri Ramakrishna was resting in his room after his meal. So yes, this was on April 8th, I believe it was. And so we in America think of summer starting in June, but no, the summer in Bengal definitely begins at the beginning of April. It gets terribly hot. March is hot, but bearable. From April, it's hot and unbearable. I've been telling people since I came here for the last couple of years that Houston is the Calcutta of America. But I have been making a mistake. I won't say that anymore. Houston gets terribly hot, yes. But I was recently in India, as you know, and I was there in March through the first week of April. And the late March and early April, it was terribly hot. I came back to Houston, and here it felt so cool. And even now, it's nothing like now in the late May, it's nothing like it was in early April in Calcutta. So here in June, July, August, early September, yes, it's very, very hot, but otherwise it's nothing like Calcutta. So M describes the noonday sun. The people of Basirhat, Rakhal's birthplace, had been suffering from a severe drought during the summer months. Master to Manilal. Rakhal says that the people in his native village have been suffering seriously from a scarcity of water. Why don't you build a reservoir there? That will do the people good. Smiling, you have so much money, what will you do with all your wealth? But they say that telis are very calculating. All laugh. Telis, those who make and sell tel, oil. So the community of telis, they are very calculating. All laugh. So here we should remember that when studying Sri Ramakrishna or Swamiji or Holy Mother, that we always have to put particular teachings in the context of their whole life, because here we find something very interesting. Sri Ramakrishna often says in the Gospel that the purpose of life is not to help others, not to do good to others. If God comes to you, are you going to ask, will you build me a hospital? No, you just want God for God's sake. And so spiritual life is about coming to God, finding God. And he would say, realize God first, and then if anything else is needed, do that then. But realize God first, and then these other things you'll find that they fall away. They're not necessary. So he always said that, and always said that the purpose of life is not doing good. The purpose of life is finding God. But here, you see the balancing teaching, that Manilal has money. And so Sri Ramakrishna is asking him if he can't do a work which is good for the people. So it's not that Sri Ramakrishna was against doing good things to help people. He wasn't against that at all. And that's why there seems to be, because we don't recognize that there seems to be a conflict between Sri Ramakrishna's teaching and Swami Vivekananda's teaching, where Sri Ramakrishna says that the purpose of life is not to help people, not to build hospitals. And Swamiji says that doing good is the only religion I know. Doing good and being good. Serve God and man, and so on. But no, there's not the contradiction, because Sri Ramakrishna also taught, as he taught Manilal here, to do good for people. That Manilal had money. But he never taught that that is religion, that just building reservoirs and building hospitals and getting busy with charity work, that is religion. No, do good to people. Do organized good to people. Organize charitable programs and institute work that benefits the people, the poor and the suffering. That is very good. And Sri Ramakrishna was not against that at all. What he was against was that replacing spiritual life. The people thinking that is spiritual life. Just as Swami Vivekananda in another field, he kept telling people in India that take your religion out of the kitchen, get it out of the pots and pans, because he saw that many people thought, as long as I eat the right foods, I'm holy. It doesn't matter whether I'm cheating people in my business, whether I'm lying, whether I'm hurting people, none of that matters. But if I'm pukka vegetarian and eating all of the right food and it's not touched by anybody that's of a lower caste or something, then I'm holy and I'm a religious person. No, nonsense. That doesn't make you religious. But Swamiji didn't go to the other extreme and say that food doesn't matter. No, food does matter. And Swamiji gave it its rightful place. And the purity of food matters as well. But not to substitute religion with that. And you find that prevalent in India, you find it prevalent here. In India, it takes one form of who touches my food and who doesn't touch my food and all of that, and who eats near me and who doesn't eat near me and all of that. But here it takes the form of the first thing a person wants to know when they come to religious life is what should I eat and what should I not eat. Well, no, if your religion, if you want to make dietary changes, that's fine. But don't think that that is the heart of religion. That's just an external thing that may help a little bit if you take care of your food. But that's not religion itself. Religion itself is something else. That's why people like Jesus, St. Francis of Assisi, Rama, and Krishna, all of them ate meat. And yet, Krishna was Krishna, Rama was Rama, Buddha was Buddha, Jesus was Jesus, St. Francis was St. Francis. And one can be a pure vegetarian and be a worthless person who does all kinds of horrible things. So, again, that's not to say that vegetarianism is good and eating meat is bad and eating meat is good. We have to avoid the extremes. But the idea is don't make a fetish just of food. Find out what is good for you, what helps you, and what is nourishing, what is to the mind and to the body, and eat that, and give some attention to your food as far as it helps you in your life, but not more than that. And with giving. Yes, being generous is good. And so Sri Ramakrishna saw that Manilal, and he's pinching him here, as they say in India. Of course, it's a good English word, but it's used more in India than it is here, giving a pinch. Sri Ramakrishna is giving Manilal a pinch here about his being cheap, miserly, yes, being miserly. So he's trying to get him to use his money for something good, saying, what will you do with all of that money? Manilal, the narrator continuing, Manilal was truly a calculating man, though he suffered no lack of money. In later years, he set up an endowment of 25,000 rupees for the maintenance of poor students. So later he did do good. 25,000 rupees was a lot of money in those days. Now it doesn't sound like much at all, but in those days that was a huge sum of money, 25,000. And that he did for the maintenance of poor students. And so Sri Ramakrishna's influence on him had that effect. And it certainly had other effects also in his spiritual life, but it opened his generosity. Manilal made no answer to these words of the master about his caste characteristics, about his being a teli. Later on in the course of conversation, he remarked casually, "Sir, you referred to a reservoir. You might as well have confined yourself to that suggestion. Why allude to the oilman caste and all that?" So all of this time it was still burning inside that Sri Ramakrishna had given him a pinch. But some of the devotees smiled to themselves and the master laughed. So again, Sri Ramakrishna had a work to accomplish, and he accomplished it, as could be seen later in the life of Manilal, when he did become generous. And Sri Ramakrishna, knowing the nature of everyone and knowing the possibilities of everyone, he undoubtedly could see that without a sharp pinch, the words were not going to penetrate Manilal. He just brushed them off. But with the giving it a pinch, now Manilal is stewing inside and thinking about the insult that Sri Ramakrishna has given to him. And so it made a deeper impression. It might have been uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable at the time, because otherwise he wouldn't have been stewing and said something later, waiting for a moment when he could say it casually without getting angry or something. So waiting till he cooled down and then saying to Sri Ramakrishna, "You didn't really have to say that about me being a teli, did you?" But that also was with a purpose with Sri Ramakrishna. You see, in the case of Ramakrishna, in the case of the Holy Mother, and the case of Swami Vivekananda, but especially Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, that sometimes they could say something very sharply, but it was never meant to hurt people. If it hurt somebody, as sometimes it did, as in this case, the purpose was not just to hurt him. They weren't speaking out of frustration and saying, "I want to lash back and make them pay for this by making them hurt." No, it was to cut something out of their character, to surgically remove something from their tendencies. And that was what he was doing with Manilal Malik. So we'll stop here. And continue next week. So for announcements, we will have a talk on Sunday at the usual time, 11 o'clock. And last Sunday I said at the end of the talk that I was going to speak on Saraswati this Sunday, but that will not be. I'll save that for another Sunday. This Sunday, some people have asked me if I couldn't do the other half of the Dakshinamurti Stotra. We did the first half last Sunday, so I'll do the second half this coming Sunday. But if you didn't attend the first half, it doesn't matter. It will be a self-contained talk, but the material will be based on the last half, actually the last 6 verses, slightly more than half of the Dakshinamurti Stotra. And then, but before that, on Friday, tomorrow evening at 8:30 Central Time, Houston time, there will be a concert of classical music and dance by local Houston area artists, but it will be broadcast worldwide over YouTube. It's called Pratyasha We Shall Prevail. Pratyasha We Shall Prevail. It's a program to raise money for the relief efforts done by Belar Mutt in the Amphan cyclone relief in Bengal. There's great devastation done there. It was a huge storm with sustained winds up to 250 kilometers per hour. 500,000 families were left without homes. 60% of the population of West Bengal was affected, 60% of the population. The Sundarbans were devastated, and up into Calcutta, the devastation traveled up into Calcutta. And so our centers of the order, Belar Mutt, Institute of Culture, Narendrapur, and a number of other centers in the Sundarbans like Mansadeep and Sorisha, and many private centers that were like Houston used to be, centers that are affiliated with Belar Mutt but run privately. They also are joining in the effort to bring relief to the many people who are affected by the storm, the cyclone. And so this concert is being held to try to raise awareness and to raise funds for the Belar Mutt relief efforts. So I ask you all to enjoy the music, enjoy the dance. Some of our fine artists here in Houston. It'll start at 7:30 or 8:30 tomorrow evening. And so then for the rest of the announcements, next week we'll continue with the Gita class, 7:30 in the evening on Tuesday, and the gospel class again next Thursday at 11 o'clock. So with that, I'll give a closing chant unless there are any questions. No more questions. Okay. So I'll give a closing chant. Oh. Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha.